This build combines high mobility with shotgun-like damage. I have over 130 hours on Spiritborn, the most of any beta player, and with this class I have cleared higher content than anyone else. In this video I aim to show you a very simple and effective leveling strategy for 1 to 60 and then how to transition to your endgame build flawlessly. Welcome to Goblin-Inc, I am Ace of Spades. The first thing we want to do is make sure that when we create our character we select the correct campaign. We want to make sure that we are skipping the base game campaign and only play the Vessel of Hatred campaign. After this, we're gonna start our game. Next, what you're gonna do is you're gonna go and check our wardrobe from our inventory and make sure that we have a pet selected. Pets are important as they gather up resources for you on the ground and allow you to play the game without missing stuff that you will have otherwise not picked up. Before we dive into the build, let's talk about the leveling strategy, which is extremely simple. From level 1 to 20, you'll be staying in Hell Tides. After level 20, you're gonna be strong enough to go and complete your class quest, which will unlock your Spirit Hole powers. You'll be selecting Gorilla as your main Spirit Hole, and you're gonna be selecting Jagger as your secondary Spirit Hole. After that, the game gets really simple as all you have to do is follow the main quest line for Vessel of Hatred from level 20 to level 60, which will also cover all the endgame mechanics of the game and unlock all the content. It's pretty much hand-holding you for the entire game. Now, let's get into the build. I'm gonna keep it extremely simple. This build only requires one or two aspects to functions for the leveling process. We're gonna have unyielding hits, and we're gonna have rebounding aspect. Neither of those aspects are necessary, and one or two of them, in each case, you're gonna be fine. A lot of the damage is also gonna come from your main Spirit Hole, which deals 4 damage, which we can obtain through our passives and from gear. The reason why I'm using those two aspects on my jewels is because I do not plan on changing them very often, as it is a huge waste of time and quite costly. On top of that, I like to have sockets on my jewels and keep my skull gems on them, which will provide me with more armor. The reason for that is because unyielding hits, casting Gorilla skills increases your weapon damage by a percentage of your armor for 3 seconds. All that armor is gonna end up right up on your weapon damage. So instead of having 37 damage per second, I'm gonna be adding 42% of my armor, which at the moment is 236 to it. The rebounding aspect is simply a quill aspect that doubles the damage pretty much. Anything else, you shouldn't be very careful about it. Choose the highest damage weapon you have, choose the highest armor gear you have, and if you're looking for some specific stats, Thorns and Max Life are very good, as we'll be doing a lot of Thorn damage with our main Spirit Hole, the Gorilla. This is gonna be the build that you can utilize right away in the early game, and also of course in the description you will have the fully 1 to 60 talent points and also the endgame version of the build, which I will cover later on in the video as well. Starting here with the early game, your basic skill is gonna be Fresh with Sharpness at the end, because the third attack, every third attack with Fresh is gonna grant you Ferocity. Ferocity is a Spiritborn mechanic which grants you attack speed. The more Ferocity you have, the more attack speed you have. It starts with a maximum of 4 Ferocity stacks, but it can be amplified through various mechanics. The second nice thing about Fresh is the ability to jump on targets. It functions as both a generator for resources, generator for ferocity, but also as a mobility skill. Our main damage is Quill Volley. Quill Volley has the highest base damage of any core skills. It hurls out a bunch of feathers. It also applies vulnerability, which is a 20% damage modifier, and has the best passive in the game. Advantageous Quill Volley. You hurl out 3 additional feathers and deal 10% increased damage to each enemy per hit. This effect compounds interest, and when you're gonna be on the endgame build with the double cast, it will end up being about 5 times damage multiplier, which is kinda insane. Early game it's not that powerful, but still compounding interest of that 10% scales quite nicely. Soar for mobility, it's really nice. We can also take 1 point in Enhanced Soar if you want to have the 50% extra move speed, that's okay. Ravager, we also be taking Measured Ravager. Ravager does a little bit more damage, you can increase the duration by killing enemies, and the more important thing about it is that allows your core skills to jump on targets, again more mobility, and increases your generation by 30%. It's both damage, resource generation, and mobility at the same time. Very juicy. Next thing is a passive that gives us 10% block chance, which allows us the entry to a very important passive for the early game, Bastion. Bastion provides us with thorns, this amount of thorns scale with levels, and while you have a barrier, your thorns are increased by 20%. Because we are playing with the Guerrilla main hole aspect, each time we're gonna be casting a skill, like Quill, we'll be dealing this extra thorn damage, weight or scale, and on top of that, because we have a barrier thanks to Guerrilla main hole, we'll also have our thorns increased by 20%. Next, we'll be taking Rushing Claw as another means of mobility. When you utilize all the 4 stacks, you can refill them by consuming Ferocity. Potent is a really good passive for damage. It increases our damage by 30% if you hit them 10 times with Jagger skills, and Ravager, Fresh, and Rushing Claw are all Jagger skills. For ultimates, I like the Hunter, because it resets the cooldown on kills, it adds damage, it adds Ferocity stacks, but for killing bosses, a lot of people like to play with Devour, because the Devour is pretty good boss killer, but personally I prefer the Hunter, as I do not find myself lacking the damage to kill bosses myself. This is like very early game part of the build, and of course late game you're gonna be taking more talents. The Hunter is gonna also have a way to grant you Unstoppable, so it's gonna be also your CC break. And this is gonna be your core build for the early game. Right down below, I will have the full up to 60 skill points for the entire leveling process. And now we're gonna be moving on to talking about how we're gonna transition to the end game with this build. Let's talk about the end game build, and I'm gonna go in depth because it's a new class and I cannot assume that you guys know everything about it. First thing I'm gonna tell you is that to find a lot of those uniques, the easiest thing to do is actually to use obols. So make sure that you save up your obols so that you have full obols upon reaching Torment 1 at level 60. I don't know why, but they decided that getting uniques from the obols is gonna be extremely easy. The reason why this build is effective at level 60 is because it does not require ancestral items nor mythics to function. I got the highest clear in the game, in the beta, with a non-ancestral Kepaleka. And those people with the ancestral Kepaleka. It doesn't matter because the base weapon damage is additive with the weapon damage you gain from the unyielding hits, which means that ancestral weapon or non-ancestral doesn't really matter too much. Let's talk about this build. Rod of Kepaleka does 2 things. Turns your Quill Volley into a basic skill, which makes it benefit from a variety of bonuses, makes it cost 0 resources, deals a little bit less damage, but the big part is the aspect part that says when cast at maximum vigor, your core skills consume all vigor to return to full damage, cast their largest size, and becomes guaranteed critical strikes with 3% increased critical strike damage for each point of vigor spent this way. This is an insane damage multiplier, 3% per resource spent, and as you can imagine, we're going to be getting a lot of extra resources. We have spent 100% of resources, we get a guaranteed crit, so we do not need to run critical strike chance in the build. Midnight Sun can be non-ancestral, and that's fine, as long as you have a 48-50% aspect. The important part is getting a good aspect. The only thing we care about in this ring is when you critically strike once per cast, you cannot crit multiple times to get double benefit. You get 50% of the vigor you've spent in the last 2 seconds. Very important that every time we cast, we go to 100% resources. So from 50%, how do we go to 100%? Good question, let's get into it. 50% gets multiplied by 1.3, because 30% multiplier of Ravager. The Ravager active, while Ravager is active, your core skills, dash, blah blah blah, and also all vigor generation is increased by 30%. So you do 1.5 because of the 50%, times 1.3 because of the 30%, and you get kind of close to 2.0, which will be 100% gained resource generation. meaning that 50% becomes, you know, double 50% becomes 1.0, and then we're good. So what do we do to get to 100%? A little bit of resource generation can be gained either from your ring passive. We have on the Paragon, we could get, instead of Rakan of Wake, which caps our resources, we can use another item which is identical, Yan's Blessing. The reason we are using these items is because I am not a madman and telling you guys to have a uber mythical unique on day one to make the build viable. Those items are gonna be really good for the starting week, starting couple of days. You get a lot of high resistances from them. The Yan's Blessing has the resource generation. It pretty much allows you to have everything you need to get the build online and play high torment with dreads, on like tracks. Really bad gear, you'll be able to do all content in the game because it's a very OP build, it's well optimized, and you can cap your resistances this way. So the core of the build, as you saw, is the benefit from stacking as much armor as we can, and armor on Amulet is really high now. GA armor is over 100%. It's crazy. This build does not need to have 3 passives on the amulets. It's very easy to get like dexterity, total armor, and then 1 passive, and you're Gucci. You can go with that. So we're gonna go with unyielding hits. We're gonna stack armor on our rings and jewels. That's a lot of armor, 240 per point. We stack armor with disobedience, and we stack armor with or pants with Juggernaut and disobedience. You can put disobedience and Juggernaut wherever you want, as long as you're using pants and chests for this. I will have 2 versions of the build. If you're lucky enough to get a Tyrell's Might early, there will be a version with Tyrell's Might and Legendary Boots. Otherwise, you play this version instead. Third aspect for our jewels is gonna be the Redirected Force. Very interesting aspect, as gain 70% of your block chance adds critical strike damage. It's a multiplier. And if you're blocked, this bonus lasts for 10 seconds and it's doubled. So if you have 100% block, which is the cap, you cannot go above 100% block, it is 140% damage multiplier. Okay, how do we get 100% block? We have 100% uptime on Armored Hide, which provides 100% block chance for 4.2 seconds. Also gives us Unstoppable and fills up our Resolve stacks. Let's talk about Resolve stacks for a second. We also get extra Resolve stacks on some gear. Resolve stacks are a mechanic of the Spiritborn class. They allow you to take less damage, and every time you get hit by an enemy, you lose 1 Resolve stack. And there's also both talents and Paragon glyphs that interact with Resolve stacks, and you can gain damage from having more Resolve stacks, increasing the maximum that you can have. We talked about the weapon, we talked about the boots, we talked about how we can use oboes to get all of those uniques very easily. We have shown what you want to have on your gear. The all resistance you do not need because of Yan's Blessing. This is just for me because I'm playing without it. So total armor, max life, armor, max life, armor everywhere you can get armor, even on gloves, attack speed, Quill Volley ranks, and then of course rebounding aspect, and then we have the Ebewaka helm, which damage reduction, move speed, all stats, 90% damage multiplier. All our skills have both main hole and secondary hole as passives now, so they get the tags from all of them. Most OP item in the game, could be. In terms of tempering, basic skill damage works for this build, so it's good to have. I like vortex size. Remember that you cannot go above 100% vortex size, so it's pointless to get more than that. After getting 1 roll of vortex size, you can get either stun chance, freeze chance, or you can get soar size if you like that. On the amulet, I made a mistake. Basic damage honestly is not that good. It could be cooldown reduction, it could be decent for your defensive incarnate skills, so you could go incarnate cooldown, it would be nice. I'll have to do some calculation, but again, this is like an entry level build. But I will have the fully calculated best in slot beasts on the planner as well. This is the entry level version. You can get this done on day 1, day 2, no issue whatsoever. For the gems, we go armor. The reason why I have diamond and rubies and topaz here is because we're gonna be reaching certain thresholds on our Paragon boards with them. I have a barrier generation because we're gonna be resting heavily on barrier for our defense. And this is the perfect point to talk about the runes. I have Earthen Bulwark, and I cast Earthen Bulwark for my runes every time I spend 750% of your maximum resources, which is incredibly fast for this build. We have very high frames, well, very low frames with this build. Because Quill Volley being an eagle skill, they make eagle skills being, you know, faster animation than Gorilla, because thematically that's how it works. Earthen Bulwark, it's a big shield that we increase with barrier generation from here and also from Paragon. In total, with this and our Spirit Holes being 30% barrier, we'll reach 100% barrier. Chef kiss. And for the last rune combination, I have Vortex being cast from the runes. Invoke skills from another class. You do it twice, and then you get the Vortex that pulls enemies. It increases your clear speed a lot. It's a really good combination, and I run it in pretty much every build I have. Let's talk about how do we get our cooldowns back, starting from the talents, right? Prodigy's Tempo now is great for us to run. For the leveling version of the build, we do not run this because having to switch between casting Fresh and Quill Volley prevents us from activating the second part of Prodigy's Tempo. Core skills or potency skills, when you cast third consecutive cast, will reduce your active cooldowns by 10% plus 2% for each of their skill ranks. So now that we only cast Quill Volley pretty much, we keep getting cooldown reduction every third cast and we have no cooldown on anything. On top of that, being a basic skill, we also benefit from getting the plus 2 ranks. The plus 2 ranks does not scale, so you only get 2 ranks. You cannot go, 8 ranks if you cast enough. The Hunter Resolution is more damage. I'm not gonna bore you too much with the details. Cast Ultimate, you get more damage. Spiritual Attunement, as long as you have an ultimate skill equipped, you get more Vigor. Vigor is your resources, and as you know, Kepaleka, more resources we have, more damage we do. Supremacy, it's a 10% per point damage multiplier. So 10% per point is 30% for 3 points. Very good on amulets if you can get it. Also, the second best passive for amulet, potent or best, probably it is the best. 10% per point. You deal damage with Jugger skills, which we have. Increases the damage that the enemies take from us by 30%. Furnace was the best one, was nerfed into the ground. It's still about 6.5% with 13 ferocity stacks, I believe. It's a good multiplier, but not the best. Brilliance, we do more damage with eagle skills the more move speed we have. It's a good damage multiplier, but not the best, about 6%. Resilient, it's HP. Dominant, Gorilla skills deal 15% damage extra to knock down enemies, and their first hits have a 5% chance to execute. So only the first hit can execute. It's not great. The 5% execute isn't great, but the 15% damage is chef kiss, as always. Scourge is a 50% damage multiplier. It fears and poison enemies, and enemies that we crowd control with this, when we do enough crowd control to enemies, we end up getting a 50% damage multiplier. It does not work against on bosses, but works against Fresh and works against bosses when they're staggered. On top of that, it's the only way Quill Volley has to heal efficiently. So with Adaptable Scourge, we get 35% of the damage done as lifesteal and always full HP. The only other way to lifesteal is the Jacint Shell, a unique item that it can be used in this build, but I prefer it actually on the Touch of Death build. I might make a version of this build with the Jacint Shell, but I find it to not be tanky enough for everyone's average gameplay. Counter Attack, we get the passive benefits from it, from our Ring of the Midnight Sun. And we do not run it as the active. We take Armored Hide with full points, all the benefits, Unstoppable. It grants us maximum resolve stacks every time we cast it, and also gives us a little bit of thorns and block damage reduction. The thorn damage, dealing thorn damage, which we also do because we have Gorilla, it's coming into play later on when we take a look at the glyphs. There is some stuff that interacts with you dealing thorn damage. So everything is accounted for, a variety of combination of synergies together are mixed into the build to really optimize it. We have Perseverance, again 1.5% additional damage reduction per resolve stack, and we take Endurance, which doesn't do anything to get to that point. Ravager, as we talked about it many times, it's for jumping to enemies and getting resources. We take Unrestrained Power for more damage when unstoppable. We take Apex, damage to vulnerable enemies is doubled. Focal Point, it's block damage reduction, and we do not take a diminishment. People will ask me about it. Vulnerable enemies deal 5% less damage to you per point. Now, shadows, AoE on the ground, death effects cannot be vulnerable, so you would die from them anyway. And generally speaking, enemies that are far away are the ones that kill me. If someone is close to me and I'm seeing him and I apply my other debuffs, I'm not dying from them. It's the far away ones generally that gets me. Soar with 50% movement, it's nice. And then we do not take Vortex because we use it from the runes, if you guys remember. We take Balanced Exertion for 15% more damage, 1 point in generation here. Full points Quill Volley with advantageous Quill Volley, and Crash is down to 2 points because we do not need Sharp Crash and we do not use the skill. That is for the skill tree. And now the part where everyone clicks away, but I would advise you guys for the first time, even though you're gonna copy the Paragon board, to at least take a look at what you need to have and why the mechanisms of the build works this way. So here, the important part of the Colossus Glyph is you deal 2% increased damage for each stack of Resolve you have. Now you see why we are building Resolve stacks on our amulets, you know, as a tempering. Our first board is going to be Viscous Shield. We deal extra 1% damage per 3% of maximum life as you have as a barrier. Now you know why we run so much barrier. And we take a lot of damage reduction, 12%, 3%, 3%, and 3% more damage reduction while you have a barrier. Very tanky with our barriers. The board of Spiritborn is very powerful. A lot of max life with armor, barrier generation, max life with resistances, max life attack speed, very OP. The glyph here is gonna be Kenny, more non-physical damage. Quill Volley is electric damage. We take Convergence. You deal bonus damage equal to 20% of your 2 highest bonus damage types combined, up to 30%. People do not know what this does. I do. It is the bonus damage has to be only from bonus types like lightning, fire, or like anything that is like elemental, shadow, poison works for this. Anything else does not count for the bonuses. So you need enough elemental damage for this one to work, and it will be accounted for in the build. Do not worry about it too much. Spirit, critical strike damage bonus, GG. Next board, Revealing. 30% more damage to card control enemies and a chance to knock down vulnerable enemies is nice. Talon, Eagle's Kill dealing more damage is nice, but we might have to change that glyph. Sapping, you deal more damage when you cast different types of skills. TLDR is a 30% damage multiplier for the build, and the resource from it is not really important. It does not work for us and is not necessary in this build. Revenge, important because dealing Thorns damage, as you can see, the passive of Revenge says that dealing Thorns damage to an enemy increases all damage they take from you by 1% up to 15%. And those are by far the best glyphs you can run. And yeah, so that's why we run all of those glyphs. On top of that, Revenge is also buffing rare nodes. And this is important in this board because we have maximum resource here. As you remember, resource is important because Kapelek is based on resource. And with that, I have explained all the mechanics I've chosen for the build, why I'm running them, and I hope you guys was an interesting build, and yeah, let me know what you think about it. Personally, this is gonna be the best starting build. I will play this and gather up my gear, and eventually I will move to Touch of Death, I believe. But you will see me play this build in the beginning, or probably first week. If you guys enjoyed, and leveling up with it for sure, and I'll see you guys on the next video, or on stream. Catch me on